Our next sample is the top stitching sample. I've skipped ahead a little bit. The first instructions tell you to take two rectangles, sew them together at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and to press them open. So here's our sample ready to go for our top stitching. I sewed them together at 5/8 and then I pressed the seam open. Now for top stitching, it basically means to sew on the top or on the right side. So I'm going to turn my sample over so that the pretty side is showing. The next step says, on the pretty side, line up the left edge of the presser foot evenly with the stitch ditch. The stitch ditch is basically this line created when two fabrics join each other. So that's the stitch ditch, or the seam line right there. So when I place this in the machine, I'm going to line up the left edge of my presser foot with the stitch ditch. And you can see that this fabric, the total sample, covers up all of our stitch plate. So we won't be able to follow the stitch plate. We're going to line up the left edge of our presser foot and follow the stitch ditch down the right hand side. So then it says all you got to do is sew a straight line or a top stitch down the right side. So I'm going to put my needle in. I'm going to pull the fabric to the back. And I do need to back stitch, so I'm going to go forward, I'm going to back stitch, and what I'm following is my stitch ditch and the left edge of my presser foot. And I follow it and just go straight all the way down. And remember, my hands are just guiding, they're not pushing the fabric or pulling it. Back stitch at the end, and we're going to take it out and trim all of our threads. So here's the first side of my top stitch. You can see my black thread is following the edge, and if you turn it over, you'll notice because you pressed it open, you've basically sewn your seam allowance down, and that's one of the reasons for a top stitch. Okay, we're going to do the other side as well. So I'm going to flip my sample, turn it around, and again line up the left edge of my presser foot with my stitch stitch. So you should have 2 rows of stitching on the top. So I'm going to place this in again. Lower the presser foot, line up the left edge with the stitch ditch, pull my threads to the back, back stitch to the edge, and follow the line, the stitch ditch, all the way down with the left edge of my presser foot. When I get to the bottom, I'm going to back stitch, lift it out, trim my threads, make sure we trim all the threads. Alright, so when I look at my sample, now I have 2 vertical rows of stitching right on either side of the stitch stitch, and when I turn it over, I can see that my seam allowances have both been sewn down or sewn flat. So now you're ready to staple it into the next page on your book. When you staple the top stitching sample in, make sure this time that the right sides are up so that I can see your stitches. And you only need to staple the top edge so that I can flip it up and down and check the other side.